They say a man's home is his castle. Right now, my castle was about 70% exposed insulation, 20% drywall dust, and 10% pure, unadulterated existential dread. But the deck was 100% glorious. It was the first and only part of my ambitious fixer-upper project to be completed, and I had sunk the last of my 401k into its ridiculously expensive IPE Brazilian hardwood planks. My financial advisor, a man named Gary who communicated exclusively in worried sighs, had called it a bold strategy. This, I'd learned, was finance speak for, "You are a spectacular idiot, and I'm legally obligated to document this for when you inevitably sue me." But as I sat there in a dusty camp chair, nursing a craft beer that cost more than my lunch, and watched the sun dip below the surgically manicured hellscape of Serenity Meadows, it felt worth it. The air was warm, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the undeveloped scrubland behind my property line, and for the first time in months, the sound of power tools had been replaced by the chirping of crickets. This was the dream. I'd escaped the cubicle farm, cashed out my meager retirement to become a freelance web developer, and bought a house that was less move-in ready and more condemned adjacent. It was my personal urban rebirth, a testament to the American dream, albeit one that required a tetanus shot and a high tolerance for sawdust in your cereal. For a glorious 7-minute stretch, I felt a sense of profound peace. Then my phone buzzed. It was an email, of course, an email with a subject line so passive-aggressively alarming it could only have come from one person. Subject: urgent. CC and R violation. Notice #4. Unapproved construction debris and vehicular transgressions. The sender was Brenda Kravitz, president, chairwoman, and supreme overlord of the Serenity Meadows Homeowners Association. Brenda was a woman who likely believed that beige was a dangerously provocative color and that lawn gnomes were a gateway to anarchy. I sighed, the brief tranquility shattering like cheap glass. I opened the email. It was a masterpiece of petty tyranny. Dear Mr. Maxwell, it has come to the attention of the Architectural Control Committee, a committee of one, Brenda, that your property at 125 Larkspur Lane is once again in violation of our community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. CC and Rs. 1. Your construction dumpster, while previously approved for a 14-day period, has now entered its 15th day. As per Article 9, Section 3AA, this constitutes a visual blight and a Class 2 infraction. A fine of $50 per day will be retroactively applied. 2. Furthermore, at approximately 14:37 this afternoon, your contractor's vehicle, a red Ford F-150 license plate 8KL321, was observed departing the community with a mud flap that was, by our measurement, approximately 1/4 inch shorter than the mandated minimum of 12 inches. See attached photographic evidence, Exhibit A. Please rectify these violations within 24 hours to avoid further penalties. We are all responsible for maintaining the aesthetic integrity and property values of Serenity Meadows. Sincerely, Brenda Kravitz, HOA President. Attached were 3 high-resolution, time-stamped photos. One of the dumpster, looking menacingly dumpstery. One of the offending mud flap, zoomed in so close you could see the Ford logo. And a third, wider shot that captured my contractor, Carlos, flipping off the camera, a detail I'm sure Brenda had saved for my official hearing. "Oh, for the love of all that is holy," I muttered to my beer. "Brenda, you magnificent pain in my ass. It's a construction site. What do you expect? A string quartet playing next to the porta-potty?" I paused, a cold dread washing over me. "Wait, is that in the bylaws? I should probably check." I began to type a reply, my fingers dancing between diplomacy and the searing sarcasm that was my native tongue. I was just about to hit send on a carefully worded message that implied Brenda should measure something other than mud flaps for a change when I smelled it. Smoke. At first, I dismissed it. It was dinner time. Someone was probably having a barbecue. My neighbor Todd had a smoker the size of a Fiat and an unhealthy obsession with brisket. But this wasn't the savory, hickory-kissed aroma of slow-cooked meat. This was acrid, dry, the smell of things that shouldn't be burning. I stood up, my half-composed email to Brenda forgotten. I walked to the edge of my glorious, violation-attracting deck and looked over the fence. The undeveloped woods that bordered my property, a lovely expanse of nature that the realtor had called a privacy buffer, was glowing. Not everywhere, just in one spot, 100 yards back. A faint, pulsing orange, like a malevolent nightlight. A thin plume of gray smoke was rising from it, twisting lazily into the twilight sky. "Okay," I said to the empty yard. "Not barbecue." My heart, which had been lolling about in a state of beery contentment, suddenly did a little tap dance against my ribs, a frantic, caffeinated rhythm of "oh crap, oh crap, oh crap." The glow behind the trees wasn't the sunset. It was the wrong kind of orange, the expensive, property damage, act of God, insurance clause kind of orange. Then I saw it. A flicker of actual flame. It wasn't big, but it was hungry. It licked up the side of a dead, dry pine tree, and in the light breeze it leaned, almost casually, in the direction of my house. My expensive, uninsured, half-built, predominantly wooden castle. My hands felt suddenly slick and clumsy as I fumbled for my phone. The screen was still lit up with Brenda's email. With a shaking thumb, I swiped it away and hit the call icon. I dialed 911. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and terrifyingly detached from the reality of my IPE planks being threatened with immolation. 911, what's your emergency? "Hi, yes, hello, there's a brush fire behind my house," I said, my voice higher than I wanted it to be. 125 Larkspur Lane, in the Serenity Meadows subdivision. It looks like it's moving fast. "Okay, sir, stay calm," the operator said, her tone suggesting I had just called to report a lost cat. "Is the fire threatening your structure at this moment?" "Threatening my... It's about 100 yards from my brand new, highly flammable deck. So, yes, I'd say the threat level is hovering somewhere around imminent financial and emotional ruin." I was practically shouting now. "We are dispatching the fire department, sir," she said, completely unfazed. "The station is only a few miles from there. Can you meet the engine at the entrance to your community to guide them in? It can be confusing in those new developments." "Absolutely, yes. On my way." I hung up, grabbed my keys from the hook by the door that wasn't there yet, and sprinted through the skeletal remains of my future living room. Plastic sheeting billowed around me like ghostly sails. I jumped into my dusty pickup truck, the one I bought because it felt more fixer-upper authentic, and peeled out of my driveway, spraying gravel across the pristine asphalt. As I raced toward the front entrance, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The smoke was thicker now, a dirty brown smear against the darkening sky. My urban rebirth was on the verge of becoming a suburban cremation, and the only thing that could stop it was a big red truck full of water. What could possibly go wrong? The entrance to Serenity Meadows was an architectural monument to suburban insecurity. A grand double-wide gate of heavy, black painted iron was flanked by two massive brick pillars. A small, adorable gatehouse, complete with fake shutters and a perfectly manicured flower bed, sat to the side. It was designed to project an image of safety, exclusivity, and high property values. Right now, it was projecting an image of pure, uncut, bureaucratic idiocy. I skidded to a stop 20 feet away. The massive, gleaming red brush engine from the local fire department was parked in front of the gate, its impressive bulk making the grand entrance look like a dollhouse accessory. Its lights were flashing, painting the scene in silent, urgent strokes of red and white. But the siren was off. A burly fire captain was standing outside the truck, his expression a mixture of confusion and profound weariness. And standing between the fire engine and the gate's electronic keypad, with her arms crossed and her chin held high, was Brenda Kravitz. She was holding her phone up, recording the entire scene as if it were a deposition. I slammed my truck into park and ran towards them, my boots crunching on the pristine gravel shoulder. "Brenda, what in God's name are you doing?" I yelled, my voice hoarse with panic. "Open the gate!" Brenda didn't even look at me. Her focus was entirely on the fire captain, a man who looked like he could bench press her Prius. As I was just explaining to this, "Gentlemen," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "all commercial and emergency vehicles must have their community-issued RFID decal properly displayed on the upper left-hand corner of the windshield for automated entry. It's Article 7, Section 4B of the CC&Rs. It's for security." The fire captain, a man whose patience had clearly been eroded by years of dealing with the public, took a slow, deep breath. "Ma'am, for the 10th time, we're the fire department. We don't have an HOA decal. We have lights, we have sirens. We're here to put out a fire, at his house." He jabbed a thumb in my direction without taking his eyes off her. Only then did Brenda deign to look at me. A thin, triumphant smile played on her lips. It was the smile of a predator who had just cornered its prey. "Mr. Maxwell, 4 violation notices, an unapproved dumpster, a contractor with a defective mud flap, and now you're attempting to circumvent community protocol by summoning an unregistered emergency vehicle? The audacity is truly breathtaking." I stared at her, my mouth hanging open. The smoke from my property was now visible over the rooftops behind her, a dark stain on the heavens. "Unregistered? It's a fire truck. It says fire on the side in letters bigger than your entire body. They don't need a decal, Brenda. They need to get through this gate before my house becomes a pile of ash." "And whose fault would that be?" she shot back, tapping her phone screen with a perfectly manicured finger. "Perhaps if you had maintained your property to code, it wouldn't be such a fire hazard. I am documenting this entire exchange. This blatant disregard for our community rules is exactly why property values are constantly at risk." I was trapped in a vortex of suburban madness, a Kafkaesque nightmare orchestrated by a woman powered by decaf lattes and pure, uncut spite. Behind me, a literal forest was burning down. In front of me was a truck containing thousands of gallons of water and a team of capable professionals. And the only thing stopping the water from meeting the fire was a 5-foot 4-inch dictator in orthopedic sandals. I could feel a blood vessel in my forehead starting to pulse in rhythm with the truck's silent, flashing lights. The fire captain tried again, his voice strained. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I have a fire to get to. If you don't open this gate, I'm going to have to call the police and report you for obstructing emergency services." Brenda actually puffed out her chest. "Go right ahead. I will be happy to explain the situation to them. In the meantime, I am calling our private security company to come and verify the emergency, as is the proper procedure. They should be here in 15 to 20 minutes. 20 minutes? I shrieked. In 20 minutes, I'll be roasting marshmallows on the embers of my living room sofa. The firefighters were in a bind. I could see it in their faces. They were legally prevented from ramming a private gate without a direct police order or an immediate, visible threat to life, neither of which they technically had. My house wasn't fully engulfed yet. It was just about to be. The red tape was as effective a barrier as the iron gate. My own phone rang in my pocket. It was the 911 operator. "Sir, our team is reporting they are being denied access at your front gate. Is that correct?" Yes, that is correct," I yelled into the phone, turning my back on Brenda. "The fire truck is here, but they're being held hostage by our HOA president over a sticker, a non-existent RFID sticker. Send the police, send the National Guard, send a certified therapist because I am officially losing my goddamn mind." I hung up and started pacing, a caged animal in a zoo of idiocy. The glow of the fire was brighter now, casting an ominous orange pallor on the perfect suburban homes. My mind was a whirlwind. What do you do when the system designed to help you is being blocked by a different, stupider system? Then, a memory sparked in the chaos of my brain. A conversation from a few weeks ago with my contractor, Carlos. He'd been complaining about Brenda fining him because his paint swatches were not of a pre-approved earth tone. As he was leaving, he'd pointed to a beat-up, greasy business card pinned to the corkboard on my half-finished kitchen wall. "Hey, boss," he'd said, "if you ever have a real weird problem, like you need a generator airlifted to your roof, or you find your dog who ran off into the canyon, you call this guy, Jed. He's resourceful." Resourceful! My eyes went wide. I fumbled for my wallet, yanking it from my back pocket. I tore past my debit card, my driver's license, a gym membership I'd used exactly once, and there it was, tucked behind a coupon for a free car wash. A crumpled, oil-stained business card. The lettering was simple, blocky, and faded. Jedstone, Aerial Solutions. Got a problem? I've got a helicopter. Cash preferred. It was the most insane idea I'd ever had. It was desperate. It was probably illegal on a dozen different levels. I dialed the number. The line crackled to life after 2 rings. No greeting, no company name. Just a gruff, gravelly voice. "Jed." I turned away from the ongoing, circular argument at the gate, cupping my hand over the phone. "Hi, my name is Leo. You don't know me. Carlos the contractor gave me your number," I said, my words a rushed whisper. "You do? Aerial Solutions?" There was a pause. I could hear the sound of wind on the other end. "Sometimes." "Okay, this is going to sound weird," I said, my heart hammering. "My house is on fire. The fire department is locked out of my neighborhood by the HOA. How fast can you get here, and how big is your bucket?" Another pause, longer this time. I imagined a grizzled man in a dusty hangar, stroking his chin. "Serenity Meadows?" he finally rumbled. "That yuppie prison off Route 7? Ha! Yeah, I know it. Fire's visible from my place. You got $5,000 cash?" My stomach dropped. "What? No, I have a credit card, and a half-built house that's about to be worth approximately $0. "I'll take the credit card," Jed grunted. "But I'm charging you 10% for the inconvenience. And you ain't getting a receipt. I can be over you in 10 minutes. Look up." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in my hand, staring at the screen in utter disbelief. I looked at Brenda, who was now condescendingly explaining the importance of curb appeal to the fire captain. I looked back in the direction of my house, where the smoke was now a terrifying, billowing column that was starting to block out the stars. The choice, as insane as it was terrifyingly clear. I didn't wait to see how the standoff at the gate ended. I just turned and ran. I sprinted past my truck, down the perfectly paved street, my lungs burning. I wasn't running toward my house, but toward the small, manicured community park a block away from it. It had a gazebo, a playground that looked like it had been sanitized by men in hazmat suits, and most importantly, a wide, open patch of unnaturally green grass. I stood in the middle of that lawn, phone clutched in my hand like a religious talisman, and waited. I could hear a faint whoomp, whoomp, whoomp in the distance. It wasn't the heavy, authoritative beat of a news or police helicopter. This was a lighter, more frantic sound. A sound with character. A sound that probably ran on cheap gas and sheer willpower. It got louder and louder. This was it. The single dumbest decision in a lifetime of questionable choices. I was about to bet my life and my last shred of available credit on a man I'd spoken to for 90 seconds, a man whose business model seemed to be cash-only chaos. But as the sound of rotor blades chopped through the air, drowning out the distant, useless wail of a police siren finally arriving at the gate, it felt like the most rational thing I'd ever done. A shape appeared over the line of identical McMansions. It was a Bell 47, the kind of helicopter you see in old MAS*H reruns. It was skeletal, all bubble cockpit and exposed metal framework, looking less like a sophisticated flying machine and more like a high school science project that had gotten dangerously out of hand. It was painted a faded, chipped yellow that suggested it had once been used for crop dusting, or maybe starring in a low-budget action movie. Dangling beneath it on a long, thick cable was a massive, collapsible orange bucket. A Bambi bucket. The Dragonfly on steroids maneuvered with a surprising agility, its rotor wash blasting the park's pristine petunias and sending a cloud of mulch into the air. I imagined Brenda having an aneurysm. The helicopter descended, hovering about 30 feet above me. A man leaned out of the open-air cockpit. He was wearing a greasy ball cap, a faded denim jacket, and a pair of aviator sunglasses, despite the fact that it was now nearly dark. This had to be Jed. He didn't shout. He didn't wave. He just pointed a gloved finger down at the giant orange bucket, which was now hovering 5 feet off the perfectly manicured lawn. Then he gave me a sharp, impatient, "Well, get on with it" gesture. There were no seats, no safety harness, no complimentary peanuts. It was just a giant, empty, slightly grimy bucket. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me!" I yelled at the sky, the sound instantly whipped away by the wind. "I'm flying in the bucket!" Jed just nodded again, more emphatically this time. There was no time to argue. No time to reconsider. I took a running start, grabbed the lip of the bucket, and clumsily hauled myself over the side, landing in a heap on the bottom. It was slick with what I hoped was old rainwater and smelled faintly of algae and pond scum. The second my weight settled, the helicopter lurched upwards with a force that slammed me against the bottom. The world became a blur of green grass, spinning treetops, and my own stomach trying to exit through my throat. We shot up into the sky, and then I saw it. The view was breathtakingly, surreally beautiful. From 100 feet up, Serenity Meadows was a perfect, glowing grid. The identical beige roofs, the sparkling blue rectangles of swimming pools, the pristine white lines of the tennis courts. It was a model train set come to life. Jed banked hard, and we flew directly over the front gate. I looked down and saw the scene in perfect miniature. The fire engine, still parked. The newly arrived police car with its flashing blue and red lights. And a tiny, furious figure in a beige pantsuit, Brenda, gesturing wildly at the sky, her mouth opening and closing like a goldfish. I was a UFO in her perfect, orderly world, an unauthorized aerial anomaly. I scrambled to my feet, braced myself against the side of the bucket, and gave her the finger. It was a small, futile, and deeply, profoundly satisfying gesture. Then Jed turned again, and my brief moment of triumph was replaced by pure, cold terror. I saw the fire. From the ground, it had been a worrying glow. From the air, it was a living, breathing monster. A roaring, angry beast of orange and black that had consumed half the woods and was now creeping up the hill behind my property. It had already devoured my neighbor Todd's prize-winning rose bushes and was starting to lick at his back fence. And it was moving, with a horrifying speed, right for my deck. My beautiful, expensive ipe wood deck. The terror was absolute. a cold, sharp thing that pierced through the adrenaline. But underneath it, a strange, giddy euphoria was bubbling up inside me. I was flying over my own personal hell in a bucket. Brenda could fine me for this later, if I had a house left to fine. Jed was a master. He flew us over the small man-made lake at the center of the community, the one with the swan paddle boats that Brenda was so proud of. He descended rapidly, and with a jarring thump the bucket hit the water. It submerged instantly, and a tidal wave of cold, murky lake water crashed over me, soaking me to the bone. It felt like being flushed down a giant toilet. Then, just as quickly, we were airborne again, heavier now, dripping a trail of lake water across Brenda's precious petunia beds. Jed swung the helicopter back around, lining up his shot. I held on for dear life, soaked and shivering, my knuckles white on the rim of the bucket. He hovered directly over the edge of the fire, the heat washing over us in a searing wave. Then, with a loud clunk, the bottom of the bucket opened. A torrent of water was released from beneath me. It cascaded down onto the flames with a triumphant, deafening hiss. The section of fire nearest my house vanished in a massive cloud of steam and smoke. Jed looked back at me, a grim smile visible under his sunglasses. He gave me a thumbs up. We did it again. A plunge into the lake, a drenching, disorienting scoop, and a stomach-lurching flight back to the fire line. And again. On the third drop, I felt a strange sense of ownership. I was the world's most pathetic, terrified, and oddly effective firefighter. A pond scum-covered Valkyrie in a bright orange bucket, raining down watery vengeance on the flames that dared threaten my urban rebirth. The main line of the fire, the part that had been actively menacing my property, was beaten back. It wasn't out, but it was a smoldering, steaming mess instead of a roaring inferno. In the distance, I could hear sirens again, but this time they were inside the neighborhood. The cavalry had finally broken through the gate. Jed, a man who clearly possessed a sixth sense for knowing exactly when to make a hasty exit, swung us over my own front lawn. He descended, setting the bucket down with a surprisingly gentle bump on the grass I was supposed to have mowed 3 days ago. A Class 1 violation, I was sure. He hovered for a moment, the rotor wash flattening my unkempt lawn. He leaned out of the cockpit again, shouting over the roar of the engine. "My work here is done. I'll email you a thing." "You mean a bill?" I yelled back, my voice hoarse. "Sure, a thing." And with that, Jed gave me a final, jaunty salute, pulled back on his controls, and the little yellow helicopter shot up into the smoky sky and vanished over the trees. I was left standing on my front lawn, drenched in lake water, covered in what I now realized was a thin film of algae, and trembling from head to toe. My house was still standing. The back fence was gone, the woods behind it were a blackened hellscape, and the edge of my beautiful deck was charred black. But the house was standing. I had just enough time to register this victory before the fire engine, finally freed from its purgatory at the gate, came roaring down my street and screeched to a halt in front of my house. The doors flew open, and a half-dozen firefighters spilled out, hoses at the ready. They stormed past me, their faces grim and professional, only to stop short at the edge of my backyard, looking at the smoldering woods and the soaked, blackened ground with utter confusion. The fire captain, the same man from the gate, walked slowly over to me. He looked at my drenched clothes. He looked at the puddles of lake water on my lawn. He looked up at the empty sky, then back at me. He looked too tired to be truly angry. He just looked bewildered. "Son," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "we are going to have a very long and probably very loud talk. But first, I need you to tell me, was that a Bell 47 with an unauthorized non-regulation Bambi bucket?" I summoned the last of my strength and put on my most innocent face. An airplane? Here? Gosh, no, Captain. I think I was just so scared. I must have blacked out for a minute. When I came to, some of the fire was out. It's a miracle. The captain stared at me, his eyes narrowing. He knew I was lying. I knew he knew. But he had a fire to officially put out, and the paperwork for this incident was already promising to be a novel-length work of surrealist fiction. Before he could press me, another vehicle pulled up. A police cruiser. Officer Miller, a young cop who looked like he hadn't slept since the Bush administration got out. He took in the scene. The fire truck, the smoldering trees, the team of confused firefighters, and me, dripping pond water onto my own lawn. A deep, soul-weary sigh escaped his lips. "Okay, let me guess," he said, not even bothering with a hello. This started with a 911 call about a fire, and somehow, inexplicably, ended up involving Brenda Kravitz. "She stopped the fire truck at the gate," I said, my voice flat. "It didn't have the proper HOA sticker." Officer Miller closed his eyes for a full 3 seconds. I think he was praying, or possibly just checking to see if he was still alive. "Of course she did," he muttered. He opened his eyes and pinned me with a tired gaze. "Sir, I'm not even going to ask about the miracle, but do you have any idea how many FAA regulations you and your divine intervention just likely violated?" As if summoned by the mere mention of her name, a pristine white Prius pulled up behind the police car. Brenda emerged, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 bewildered-looking private security guards who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She marched onto my lawn, her orthopedic shoes making squishing sounds in the damp grass, and immediately began taking pictures of my scorched deck with her phone. "Unapproved aerial activity," she declared, her voice ringing with triumphant indignation. "Flagrant endangerment of community members, willful destruction of the common area greenbelt, not to mention the damage to your own property, which is now a hideous eyesore. Maxwell, you are finished in this community. I'm calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow." The adrenaline, the terror, and the sheer, mind-numbing frustration of the last hour coalesced into a single point of pure, unadulterated clarity. I was done being scared. I was done being polite. "Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "My house was on fire. You stood at that gate and blocked the fire department while you lectured them about stickers. You're lucky this isn't a crime scene. Now get off my property before I file a restraining order against you and your entire beige wardrobe." Brenda sputtered, her face turning a shade of red that would have definitely been a CC and R violation. But before she could retaliate, the fire captain stepped between us. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now laced with cold, official authority. "You need to leave. Now. This is an active fire scene, and you can be sure that a formal complaint for felony obstruction of emergency services will be filed with the D.A. S office first thing in the morning. We have your actions on our vehicle's dash cam." That was it. The magic words, felony obstruction dash cam. For the first time since I'd met her, Brenda Kravitz was speechless. The clipboard sagged in her hand. Her armor of bylaws and regulations had been pierced. She shot me a look of pure, venomous hatred, turned on her heel, and marched back to her Prius, her security detail trailing behind her like confused puppies. The next morning the air still smelled of smoke and wet ash. My backyard looked like a war zone. But my house was still there. I was standing with Carlos, my contractor, surveying the damage. He had a cup of coffee in one hand and an expression that wasn't shocked or horrified, but rather professionally intrigued. He kicked at a blackened post on the edge of my deck. It held firm. He nodded, impressed. "So," he said, taking a sip of his coffee, "I heard you went for a ride." "Jed is a unique individual," I said, my body aching in places I didn't know I had. "He gets the job done," Carlos said with a shrug. So, the good news is the main structure is fine, solid. The bad news is this whole back wall needs to be reframed and resided. And the deck. He trailed off, looking at the charred ipe planks. The deck has character now. Character? I said. Carlos, it looks like a dragon tried to eat it and then spit it out. Yeah, expensive character, he laughed. Look, we can fix it. We can rebuild. It's what we do. It's an urban rebirth, right? This one's just been baptized by fire a little more than we planned. A week later, I was sitting in my camp chair on my damaged deck, drinking a beer. The charred parts were ugly, but the rest of it was still glorious. My muscles still ached. My bank account was crying, but things were changing. The official community-wide email had gone out 2 days ago. Brenda Kravitz was taking a temporary leave of absence from her role as HOA president, pending the outcome of a formal investigation by the district attorney's office. But that wasn't the real story. The real story was the grassroots campaign that had erupted. Todd, whose prize-winning roses had been martyred in the fire, had started a petition to have her permanently removed. It had over 100 signatures in 24 hours. People I'd never even spoken to had stopped by to shake my hand, calling me the bucket guy. Her reign of petty terror was crumbling, not from a direct attack by me, but from the sheer undeniable weight of her own absurdity. My phone buzzed. It was an email from an address I didn't recognize. Jedediah Stone-Ariel@AOL.com. My heart pounded. This was it. The bill. The one that would finally push me into bankruptcy. I opened it. There was no formal invoice, no PDF attachment, just a single, blurry JPG. It was a picture of a cocktail napkin. Scrawled on it in blue pen were the words, $5,500 for bucket ride and property moisturization. Below it was a smiley face. I stared at the napkin, at the ridiculous, unprofessional, and somehow perfect thing on my screen, and I started to laugh. A deep, loud, unrestrained laugh that echoed across my scorched, half-beautiful, half-disastrous backyard. My house was a wreck. I was in debt up to my eyeballs to a man who still used AOL. I was almost certainly on some FAA watch list. But as I sat there, looking out at the recovering landscape, I'd never felt more at home. I'd fought a fire with a bucket. I'd stared down a tyrant armed with a clipboard. The urban rebirth was going to be more expensive and infinitely more complicated than I ever could have imagined. But the view from my stupidly expensive, partially burnt deck, it was finally, completely mine. And I knew with absolute certainty that no one was ever going to tell me my fire truck needed a sticker again.